Fairmont Crest just detonated like a powder keg. Chelsea didn't just survive a staged accident, she flipped the board and ripped the ceiling off a network of slush funds, sham research contracts, and an audio recording strong enough to send Madison into freefall. But that victory opened a deeper abyss. Donors are stampeding to save themselves, a suspended license hangs like a blade, and an invisible hand is shifting from noisy smears to precision strikes. Joey has dropped the weight of truth, Vanessa is seething at being sidelined, Leslie holds an insurance rider that can turn humiliation into payout, and Derek is on the brink as Shanice chooses honesty. Tonight we won't just replay Chelsea's knockout, we'll peel back the shell of rage, trace the path of the money, and see who dares touch the power flywheel spinning fast enough to grind fragile alliances to dust. The only question, is this victory the dawn of justice or a one-way ticket turning Chelsea into a cleaner version of her enemy? Chelsea did not win by luck but by a deliberate accumulation of anger, cold enough to hone into strategy, hot enough to burn away the pious shells that had protected Madison for months. Each scrap of paperwork, every transaction line, every broken thread of email like the smoke trail after an explosion, Chelsea laced them together into a chain, not for the thrill of triumph but out of a buried fear that if she paused even half a step, her life would slide back down the familiar slope where the decent always lose and the ones who stage accidents and manipulate the press are invited on stage to accept flowers. The emergency hearing was not just a morning at court, it was an autopsy on the rotting body of Fairmont Crest, where money and prestige were two hands squeezing truth until it turned blue. Madison arrived as if still wearing the talismans of donors, accreditors, and whispered assurances that every scandal can be managed. But Chelsea didn't present a case, she deployed an ecosystem of lies, starting with slush funds coursing through the shell of a charity, pumping cash into sham research contracts to generate favorable data, and ending with internal emails where deadite phrases like control the narrative and brand contamination hardened into evidence of criminal intent. When the picture finally locked in, even those who have long treated scandal as a seasoning felt a chill, because of the way Madison translated ruthlessness into management, converting personnel risk into profit curves, as if the whole thing were a mass psychological test of the community's moral pain threshold. The so-called side plots were no longer branches. They were roots tunneling deep, making the ground under everyone porous. Joey, long filed away as a pragmatic man with a neutral face, quietly slid onto Chelsea's scale an audio recording of a dirty bargain, Madison haggling over a stake in exchange for the silence of a lab technician who held the key to physical evidence. It wasn't chivalry, it came from nights of Joey staring at his recent choices, wobbling between interest and selfhood, hating himself for staying quiet and fearing the loss of control that comes with speaking. When Chelsea accepted the file, she didn't thank him, knowing every favor in Fairmont Crest compounds with interest. She fitted it into place like a gear, already pricing in the counterpunch that would hunt the leak. What Joey failed to price was Vanessa's reaction. Vanessa, who needs to stand at the center of any information map, read it as double betrayal. Betrayal of her and betrayal of the rules she thinks should govern their relationship. Her anger wasn't loud, it was patient and highly engineered, starting with the retrieval of communication channels, a restructuring of logistics, and a string of harmless questions that tunneled into Joey's decision history, engineering a thin oxygen environment where his smallest errors could flare into incidents. Leslie entered the frame like a legal blade already sharpened. In the insurance stack she found a barely noticed rider that transforms reputational harm caused by defamation and fraud into damages many times larger than direct loss. For Chelsea, it was not only a chance to reclaim what was taken but also a device to force Madison's donors to choose, accept a class action dragnet, or publicly disengage and save themselves. In Chelsea's eyes, Leslie saw something both dangerous and salvific, a light in someone pushed to a wall and choosing to face it rather than flee. She also saw how thin the boundary is between restoring dignity and becoming addicted to victory. Once you taste the command and control of narrative on your own terms, will you ever stop when the flywheel of revenge begins to spin? The question didn't aim to scold, it measured how far Leslie herself was ready to collude with a strategy of burying an opponent in both law and public opinion, because in this world if you don't push to the end, someone will redefine the result in the final minute. On another axis, Derek was trapped in a snare he built for himself, recovering faster than expected. He treated truth as a PR risk rather than the foundation of trust with Ashley. A mild lie to avoid pressure swelled into a structural secret, pushing Shanice into the role of professional shield. Shanice, patient to the point of merciless in her allegiance to the ethics of care, locked Derek into a painful triangle. Either tell Ashley the truth about functional gains, or accept that she will file an independent report that helps Chelsea while entombing him. For Shanice, it wasn't choosing sides, it was refusing to become an instrument. For Derek, it was a late lesson in how private lies, no matter the love pretext, are swallowed by larger currents where people weigh them against the public good. The fear of losing Ashley blended with shame at leaning on a manipulated statement, splintering into fussy decisions, delays, evasions, extra fog layers to prolong the illusion of safety. But once Leslie entered Shanice's report into the court record, Derek's defensive scaffold would collapse like a house of cards, and that rubble would not just resurrect his injuries symbolically, it would obliterate the one thing he cannot bear to lose, Ashley's unjudging gaze. Anita and Vernon, veterans of exploiting vacuums of power, read Madison's plunge as a signal to rebalance the sponsorship streams. They didn't charge into the void with moral slogans, they arrived with spreadsheets, benefit tiers, and one disarming promise: stability. In a community exhausted by scandal, the pledge "we won't explode" outcharms any vision. Anita knew buying stability means buying time, and time here is priced by helping donors detach from Madison before Leslie's tidal wave of claims hits. In sealed room negotiations, Anita and Vernon traded access, media guarantees, and failover structures, weaving a crisis net stiff enough to stand on without getting their shoes wet. Yet this rescue could incubate suspicion. If the money leaves Madison too fast and too clean, who's to say they didn't know from the start? In that gray field they chose silence, letting the outcome rewrite the backstory. Naomi, the cyclone of private upheaval, turned into an accidental infection vector for information. A snippet she believed harmless landed among the already tired of Madison donors and triggered the final lean toward withdrawal. Naomi did not mean to strike, she simply couldn't stand feeling caged inside other people's plans. But dominoes don't wait for intention, and as budgets shifted color, Madison knew the oxygen was being cut. From there her rage submerged into a long memory state, retreating from public battle lines to secret regrouping, where old favors, unfinished concessions, and not quite erased data can be retooled as weapons. Chelsea sensed the pivot in a small thing. A handful of anonymous accounts changed their attack pattern, moving from smear to precisely targeted doubt about her past decisions, as if a gloved hand were testing the community's tolerance for a prolonged counter-campaign. When the board suspended Madison's license on a provisional motion, no one clapped, because everyone knew it was just one rung, not the summit. Chelsea left the courthouse without celebration, just a long exhale, a slab of rock eased off her lungs. In that weightless instant she saw the gap yawning ahead. If this win isn't framed by principle, she will become a bleached version of the enemy she felled. From day one she had sworn not to trade her soul for outcomes, but fury, when well organized, blurs promises. So she shoved Leslie to the front as a standards fence, forcing every next move through procedure so anger is shaved down into clauses and evidence instead of detonating into autocratic payback. She didn't waste the moment either. Past harms became claims, spooked partners were coaxed into transparency writers, and most crucial, she demanded an independent reporting architecture to choke off any adjustment of data in the future. Step by step, Chelsea stopped being the woman fleeing scandal and became the woman defining its consequences. Vanessa watched with an unforgiving eye. Being fenced out of a circle she has always believed she belongs to poked her deepest wound, the fear of being made invisible. Vanessa does not wish to destroy Chelsea, but she will not be relegated to a good spectator. She built a parallel arena where stern but fair voices can breathe, and there she told a story about the limits of justice when it is saddled to the engine of vengeance. Her notes did not name, did not slander, only questioned, and because of that they threatened the sturdy frame Chelsea was striving to set. Joey stood between two diverging orbits, redoing an old math of loyalty, to the truth he helped unveil or to the woman he loves who feels shut out. Every choice drags a deficit, and deficits have costs, especially when outsiders only see the results and never the price of having stayed silent for too long. The boiling point of the story lies where victory blurs with liberation. Chelsea beat Madison in a major round, yet safety still fractures like pressure-stressed glass. Who stands behind Madison, a nameless network ready to sweep up debris and recast it as reprisal, or simply the evaporation of an empire built on the convenience of many? If it is a network, the next blow will aim at her as a person, not as a legal entity. Private relationships, soft-hearted decisions, and well-earned mistakes will be inflated and twisted. If it is only an empire melting, the danger is the hollow left by triumph, where the temptation to anoint herself the standard drags her into being a cleaner copy of what she erased. As for Madison, escorted out without screaming innocence, she banked her silence like a term deposit, waiting for the interest to mature into a payout she can swing back. Old ties, dirty IOUs of gratitude, data left undeleted by negligence, all of it can be repackaged as a reconciliation of discrepancies, shifting the rematch onto a terrain few understand, collective emotion. In the hush after the provisional ruling, everyone faced their mirror. Derek must decide whether to allow the truth of his recovery to be the first cut in the image of the strong man he's trying to be. If not, everything he does remains bandages over an infected wound, and when the bandage is ripped away in court, the stench will stick to those he meant to protect. Shanice repeats to herself that honesty is not cruelty, yet at night she still asks whether she is breaking a family to preserve a principle, then remembers that any family built on lies is merely a slow-motion collapse. Anita and Vernon weigh firefighter against air to ash, step in too neatly and people will assume they knew all along. Naomi wrestles with the vortex inside, promising silence after that accidental leak, only to learn silence creates its own pressure, and pressure, as always, seeks exit through a weaker seam, likely worse. Joey looks at Vanessa and Chelsea like two hemispheres of his life, each tugging him toward a separate moral compass, and he learns the bitter lesson: there is no neutral frame in a warped field, standing in the middle just means being stretched until you snap. Fairmont Crest takes a long breath, not in relief, but to measure the dent pressed into its fake calm. Group chats shift tone from wary passivity to demands for finality. That is both chance and peril, because calls for closure often come with ambiguity about means. Chelsea knows it, so she keeps a steady march. Standardize independent grievance intake, mandate third-party money tracing, and require full disclosure of conflicts of interest. Each step is a stake driven into marshy ground. The more stakes, the less sink. Those same stakes paint a crisp target on her back, and snipers in the dark prefer straight spines. Somewhere, the unanswered questions climb the top of the list. Is the figure behind Madison real or merely a mask she uses while she retools? Will Joey's recording be the last blow or bait to haul more players into light? Does Leslie's insurance writer unlock payment or open a new ring of litigation where Chelsea is forced to prove harm by exposing intimate fragments? Will Shanice's honesty save both Justice and Derek or save only one by costing the other? Can Anita and Vernon genuinely stabilize the sponsorship ecosystem, or are they collecting a handsome, contaminated estate? Will Naomi find a balance between fear and the need to speak, or become an amplifier for operators fluent in the language of empathy as a weapon? Chelsea stood at the window in late afternoon, watching the last strips of sun fracture across the tower glass, and for a second she saw two futures. In one, she hews to principle, accepts slowness and stumbles, but builds a small order in which the cunning have to recalculate the price of wrongdoing. In the other, she grows intoxicated on the itch-scratching rush of serial wins, gradually rationalizes murky methods, and wakes one day to find she has merely swapped roles with her enemy, clothes aside. Anger brought her here, only discipline keeps her aligned. One misstep and the anger turns, devouring its host. Madison can lose license and donors, but if Chelsea loses essence, this victory becomes a down payment on a larger defeat. In the blur between those two horizons, Fairmont Crest keeps spinning like a flywheel, waiting to see who dares reach in to change the axle, who gets pulled into the teeth, and who stands aside counting scratches on the surface while insisting everything is fine. In a place where truth was once strangled past breath, one question flickers like a faulty bulb. When the dust of the hearing finally settles, what stays on the table? A standard that honors limits, or a kit of new techniques wrapped in the duct tape of righteousness ready for reuse in the next fight? And if it is the latter, will Chelsea be the first to break the very weapon that once saved her? In the end, the scoreboard looks clean but the arena is soaked. Chelsea stands at center court with the ruling in her favor and a mountain of evidence behind her, yet the silence feels predatory, like something holding its breath just out of sight. Madison's empire has been stripped for parts, licenses frozen, donors fleeing, operatives suddenly hard to reach. But ruins have a way of sheltering scavengers, and scavengers are patient. Joey's recording still hums like a live wire. If it was the match that lit this blaze, it can just as easily jump the gap and burn the hands that struck it. Vanessa's anger has cooled into calculation, the kind that redraws maps without announcing the new borders. Leslie's legal scaffolding is tall and true, but even the strongest frame can become a cage if vengeance starts furnishing the interior. And Derek, pulled between shame and love, must decide whether the truth costs him Ashley, or whether the lie has already collected that price with penalties. Fairmont Crest will wake tomorrow to a new choreography, committees rebranding accountability, sponsors auditioning their conscience, a chorus of anonymous voices measuring how far they can push the narrative before it pushes back. Chelsea can claim this as a turning point only if she refuses to turn into the thing she beat. That means fewer triumphal headlines and more unglamorous thresholds, audits that bite, reporting channels that cannot be shut, policies that make shortcuts expensive for everyone, including her allies. If she chooses the harder path, she risks slower wins and louder enemies. If she chooses the faster one, she risks becoming a beautifully lit mirror of the machine she dismantled. So here is our pact with the audience: remember the names, but watch the patterns. Notice who benefits from confusion, who profits from your fatigue, who asks for trust but never offers receipts. Tonight's victory belongs to Chelsea, but tomorrow's verdict belongs to all of us who decide whether precision truth-telling beats spectacle. The next move is already loading in the shadows: an email drafted, a call scheduled, a favor recalled like a debt. When it lands, we'll be here to dissect the impact, trace the money, and test the story against the facts. Until then, hold the line, demand proof, archive everything, and don't mistake the sound of breaking for the sound of rebuilding.